Uh, our last penetration was into the border of Czechoslovakia, and we're going down the road, and we noticed that the Skoda works, which was the one of the biggest munitions factories in the area in that country, besides in Germany and everywhere. And originally they produced locomotives and things of that nature, but the Germans took control of Czechoslovakia and they turned it into a munitions factory, and they made tanks there and everything like that. Now Skoda Works was in the outskirts of the outskirts of Field, and the factory was adjacent to a string of row houses across the street, and then there was the factory. The day before we got into town, they knew the war was practically over, but our fleet of bombers come over, flying fortresses, hundreds of them, and they pinpoint bombed the Skoda Works, and they didn't touch those row of houses. That was phenomenal to me, that the accuracy of the bombing was such that they destroyed the Skoda Works and that factory. And we all got to wondering, why did they do this? We were just about ready to take pills, and the war was just about over. What's the reasoning besides this? They can't produce enough stuff out of this thing to change the war. Mm-hmm. The war's going to be over. Why? Then we started thinking about this, and word got around. Well, they had an agreement, I think it was Potsdam or something, with Stalin and our Roosevelt and stuff. This area was supposed to be turned over to the Russians. The United States did not want the Russians to have the Skoda Works. Mm-hmm. So the last day of the war, we bombed the hell out of it. So there was our method of preventing the Russians to get all this good machinery to produce war equipment. Mm-hmm. So you can see the political situation.
The climate's changing.
Yeah, it's changing there.
Yeah.
So we proceeded into Czechoslovakia, and I think we had one fire mission after that, and that was the end of the war. We got news in Czechoslovakia that the war was over.
After the VE Day, no celebration for your unit?
Not really. No, we were all just subdued. Didn't yell or scream or have any emotional effect about it. You know, it just didn't. It's like a wait and see attitude. Mm-hmm. What's going to happen next? Mm-hmm. We became the army of occupation, you might say. Yes, we're transferred out of our gun sections, and we had to do road duty. In other words, form a line to separate the Russian troops from us. And approaching us was three German nurses, army nurses, and a couple of medical corpsmen. And they immediately held up their hands and said they wanted to surrender because they didn't want to be taken by the Russians. And I said, I'm sorry, but we've got orders from our officers that anybody coming towards us from the east is to be sent back in that direction, because they are under the jurisdiction of the Russian nation and the Russian soldiers. So they immediately says, God, they'll do everything to us, and we're begging you, let us come across. And they said, sorry, we can't do that. Now the nurses fell down on their knees and were grabbing us and says, please, God, don't let us. Our lives are going to be. What are the Russians going to do to us? It's just indescribable. So I says, I'm sorry, but I got orders. If I let you go across this line here, I said, I'll be prosecuted and I'll be court-martialed. And don't know what happened to me. I said, you better go back. So they went back. reluctantly to a tree. It was kind of a sunny day, hot, and they got under this tree and sat there. And it was approaching maybe 6 o'clock or so, or 7, and they stood there until it got dark, and they were still crying. The nurses were crying, and towards the dark, I hollered out after it was dark enough. I says, "Fräulein," I know my weak German. I says, "Fräulein, kommen Sie her und go weiter, go weiter, go fast, go home fast." And they were happy to do that. They got up and they immediately went across the demarcation line. That the road was the line, and disappeared in the dark. So I felt that I at least saved some lives there, 3 or 5 lives, because the Russians were brutal to the German soldiers, because the Germans had it coming, because they were brutal to the Russian nation when they invaded Russia. They burnt villages and everything, killed the civilians by the thousands. So it was payback time. But you hated to see it anyway. So I thought that we saved some lives there that day.
And all the death and destruction saving people was the order of the day.
Yes. Yeah, lives matter. The demarcation line was skirting through the outskirts of our town, and in our town was a brewery. Well, consequently, the Russians didn't have that over there. Well, they're sneaking in our side, and they're raiding the brewery and taking all the beer and going back to the Russian lines. Well, our officers didn't like that, so they wanted to have a conflab with their officers, the Russian officers, and stop this, you know. And meet with them. And what are they going to do? Well, how are we going to work this out? Well, they got a hold of me, and because I could speak a little bit of the language, and another guy, and I took a jeep, and I headed for the Russian lines. And come to one outpost that they had, and they stopped me and pointed their rifles at me, the Russians did. "Where you going?" and so forth, and I tried to tell them, you know, and they were kind of still arrogant about it, and so I thought, well, geez, I got to do something to get through here, you know, because I got this mission. I got to find out, bring this colonel, this guy here on the roadblock doesn't know nothing about it, you know. So, you know, then he looked at my wristwatch, and he says, "This is Timash Mickey Mouse?" In other words, "Have you got a Mickey Mouse watch?" How did that guy, that Russian soldier, know about Mickey Mouse watches in Russia at that time? I still can't figure that out. It must have, you know, they must have got movies of Mickey Mouse or some darn thing over there. But so I says, well, wait a minute. I reach in my wallet, and I open my wallet, and I reach in, I got a dollar bill. I hand it to him. I says, "Dimash, here you are. Here you got $100 bill here." $100 bill. How much is that worth in rubles? You know, I told him no. He was elated. He just struck it rich, you know. He had the 1 on the bill, but he didn't do the zeros, but he didn't make anything of that, you know. Yeah. So we went to another roadblock about the same thing. And then finally they sent us on another 10 miles or so, and finally come into this town that was full of Russians. They looked at me, and finally, after, it must have been a half hour, here is a big black, you ever see these hearses that they had years ago, for funerals, big black ones, look like a big convertible.
Yeah.
And they piled flowers into these things.
Yeah.
Well, here shows up this vehicle, and they had about 2 rows of high-ranking officers. I think they're probably generals or colonels or whatever show up, plus the driver and everything. So stout and, you know, so important, you know. And they pull up to me and in the Jeep, and they look at me and the other guy and enlisted men, and where the hell's the generals? Where's the American generals?
Oh.
We expected all the generals to be here to meet us. So I said, I'm going to take you back to our town where you're going to meet all our officers.
Yeah.
So I said, you follow me. And so we went back some 20, 30 miles and back to our area. And they came into the town, and they wanted to speak to the troops and to our officers, and I took them in a theater. And our colonel and stuff got a lot of our troops to fill the theater so they'd have an audience to speak to. Well, the Russians got on a stage with our officers, and they start talking in Russian. And he's talking to our troops, "Ya povedajte, ruska люди добрые, американские добрые." And all of a sudden, boy, these GIs, they're going to give it to them. They're going to, you know, they're going to have fun. Yeah, yeah. The audience just erupt with, you know, clapping and everything. And they don't know what the hell this guy is saying, you know. Then he goes on with another tirade, you know, and the GIs, yeah. This went on for a half hour, you know. Talk about humor. The American GI is so humorous, you know. Oh, God. And the Russians taking it all in, they thought every guy in the audience knew the Russian language. And 11 days going across the Atlantic. And then we got outside of New York a couple days, and the weather came ferocious. Waves would come towards the ship, these big rollers, and they'd be up. You'd look up to your right, and you'd see this big thing that's up 50 foot above your ship, rolling right into, like it'll come and swamp you, but it just took you and it lifted you up with it and took you up. And the next one would catch you. It just went on for mile after mile after mile. And finally we got out of that and got into New York Harbor and exited all the troops off the ship at that time. 11 days on this ship, and it was slower than heck, and we thought we'd never get to the States. But I got off the ship, I was one of the first ones off, and I kissed the ground as soon as I got off. Because I was waiting for that moment for all those years I was overseas.
Of course, we know each other because of the D-Day event in Conneaut, Ohio, and I just want to get your reflections on the event and what that might mean to you.
Well, when I first heard about it, it was I think it was an operation over at least 3 or 4 years, and I heard about it and I said, oh my God, that's a fantastic thing they're doing over there. And I went to the first affair that
for the Veterans Program.
Veterans Program, and I was just so amazed at what you were doing personally to all these veterans that came there and showed up and wanted to tell their story. They wanted somebody to listen to them. They're penned up, and they had these feelings for all their years that they were away from coming home, and to have somebody listen to what they had to say. Before that, nobody would see an old codger walking down the street with a hat on, it's the U.S. Army or something. They wouldn't have paid any attention to him. But here was a venue that they could get up there and express their feelings, how they felt about the war and what it meant to them to have some recognition as to what they did for the countries.
The final question I'll ask you, and you know, Tom Brokaw came up with the
Greatest Generation.
Yeah, Greatest Generation, and I get different responses from different veterans, but what's your take on that?
Well, I'm not being, well, bragging about our generation, but I think we did a hell of a job. You know, we were brought up in a generation where throughout the country there was no jobs available for the people. Work was scarce, money was scarce. We didn't have much to live on as far as food, money. Opportunity was not there. It couldn't be there because nothing was going. Industry was shot, you know, and we lived through that, which was difficult. And then the war started. And Uncle Sam says, you're trying to make a life for yourself now. I'm sorry, but you've got to come along with me. We've got some bad nations here who want to destroy us. You're going to have to fight for your country now. Well, Uncle Sam, what have you done for me before? You treated me like an animal. I didn't have any opportunity or anything, and now you want me to fight for you.
But you did.
We did.
Yeah.
And a lot of those boys are still over in France and Germany and in the graveyards over there. Young kids, 19, 20 years old, never had a chance to live life. Never got married, never had children. My God, what they did to get their lives for this nation. Wow.